My name's John Piekos, and until 2008 I was working in Greater Manchester Police, where I retired as a Detective Chief Inspector. In my service I was involved in crime fighting at both local and at across the force level in the Major Incident Crime Unit. After leaving GMP, I started working in the charity sector and have since that time been engaged working in anti-trafficking organisations in the UK.
Across your time, 30 years in the police, how much of that was focused on CSE, and how aware were you of child abuse issues in the Greater Manchester area, particularly by gangs?
Child abuse by gangs and group-based abuse were not really commonly understood in the early years of my service. I'd say that basically the problem in policing is that it tends to be reactive, and so if someone reports something to you, you deal with it. And consequently, we were very much demand-led. And if the demand was there, you would respond. Burglaries, crimes, robberies, etc., annoyance by youths, all those things would drive the agenda. And it's only until policing got a bit more sophisticated in the later years that people recognised that there were problems of that nature, or started to at least. And I think it's been a long, tough journey, which the police have done, lots to try and improve on recent years.
So obviously you were based out of Oldham for much of your career, especially towards the end as you retired in 2008. How aware were you of child abuse in Oldham by grooming gangs, as they're known now, in that period?
Well, initially, I don't think I was aware of the existence of grooming gangs in Oldham. And it was probably only in around turn of the new millennium, 2000, 2001 maybe, in that area where I became aware. And that was largely because we, like every other division in Greater Manchester, were plagued by missing person reports, children going missing from homes. The view at that time was these kids are out of control. You know, they don't want any help. They're just a nuisance. But you know, you're then faced with the report that they've gone missing late at night, and you know, we take a report. The children's care home don't know what to do about it. It was a really strange kind of relationship. But that's when I first became aware, and that awareness occurred because I went to try and sort out the problem with one of these local care homes in Oldham, Netherhay Children's Centre. And the staff told me that the children there were out of control. They were capable of smashing the place up, but there was nothing that the staff could do. I mean, that stunned me, to be honest, because I couldn't believe that, you know, what were they there supposed to be there for if they couldn't stop the children smashing the place up? But then they also told me that these children would go out at night and they couldn't stop them. And one of them even said, you know, in the old days, we used to take the shoes off them, but we're not allowed to do that anymore because of human rights legislation. The whole thing seemed surreal. You've got this out of control children's home and kids just behaving and doing whatever they want. So what I said to them was that, look, we can stop this for you, and the way we'll do it is I'm going to give you three things that we're going to do. Well, the first one is when one of your children starts smashing the place up and is completely out of control, call us. We'll come round. I'll arrest that child, or my officers will arrest that child on something that's called a breach of the peace, and we'll keep the child in the police station until they've calmed down, until they're ready to apologise. Bring them back. There won't be any charges. It's not a criminal offence. It's just a means of preventing really serious breaches of peace. The second thing we'll do is, if you're telling me that these children are being kept and taken away by adults and brought back in the middle of the night, often by males, a small number of the same individuals who regularly taking and keeping these children away, and you're worried that they're being abused, then I'll have them arrested. Now, what was a little bit controversial at that time was I was told that these abusers were Pakistani males, and so I actually issued a bit of a controversial instruction to my staff that if they saw a young child in the car of a Pakistani male and there was a clear indication that that might be a child from the children's care home, they were to stop the vehicle, find out what was going on, and if it was as we suspected, they were to arrest the driver of the vehicle on suspicion of abduction. And so that was the second thing that I said we would do for them. And thirdly, I said I would go around to the local mosques and I would speak to imams and tell them that anyone found with a child in the car that didn't actually that wasn't part of their family, or that was from that children's care home or from one of the children's care homes, would face arrest for abduction, and that I wanted them to influence their community to make sure this stopped immediately. And that was what I said we'd do. Well, the staff couldn't believe that. I think they were kind of lost for words, really, because, they weren't even allowed to take the shoes off these children to stop them going out and misbehaving. And they weren't allowed to physically stop them from smashing property in the building. So it was only a week or so before our first call was received, and a child was arrested and brought to the police station, much to the dismay of my custody officer. I think he was a bit concerned that this wasn't really the way that the police was meant to be being used. And there were a number of people that thought like that, and I can understand it, because he wasn't the way that the police were normally used.
Around that time, how many children do you think were at risk or were being abused by gangs?
I didn't realise. I thought this was an isolated local problem. And that's the issue for me. I'm hearing about this. I'm recognising it needs solving, but I'm not dreaming for 1 minute that this is occurring in every city and in every children's home across the country. That's not my thought at that moment. But certainly, I could see that it needed action, and that's what I tried to do.
But it didn't get enough done at the time. It was insufficient response from the whole force. Did you feel frustrated at the time about what was going on?
At the time, I didn't feel frustrated because I didn't realise that it was a problem across the whole of the force. However, I was frustrated by the response of the children's home after we'd arrested one of these children and taken them back to when they apologised to staff, and it seemed to be working really well. They were really pleased. We even then found one of the children in a car being returned in the evening by a Pakistani male, I understand. And so he was arrested on suspicion of abduction. But the child wouldn't speak to us about what had occurred. The male himself wouldn't speak to us about what had occurred, if anything had. And I don't know that anything had. But no one would speak to us. We didn't have evidence from our investigation. And then the care home wouldn't give us a statement to support the fact that that child had been taken and kept out of the care environment by this individual. And so that part of the plan collapsed. And then when I looked into it, I tried to find out what was going on. I got the impression, or it was indicated to me that the care home had been told by their management that they weren't to cooperate with this policing plan that I'd agreed with them locally. What happened shortly after that was I got approached by my subdivisional commander, and he said to me, John, you can carry on with this pet project of yours if you want. And he was referring to my actions in the children's home and my visiting mosques, etc. He said, you can carry on with that if you want, he said, but you really need to focus on your performance indicators and the things that you're measured on, and you must make sure they don't slip or fall below the standard that they should be at.
Did you feel as though that was a suggestion that if you carried on working on this issue, then you'd be in trouble?
I think it was as much of a suggestion as he felt he could give me, because had he told me not to do it, I would have become quite indignant and really angry about it.
You'd have become a problem for him.
I'd have become a problem. I didn't like being told not to do something that I thought was right. Mm-hmm. However, I thought it was a gentle message to just,
step back,
to be proportionate, maybe.
And how did you take that demand? How did you react accordingly?
I was in the very happy position of having a very, very high performing shift. So we were never going to fall below excellent on our assessments. My shift were brilliant. I was very blessed with having hard-working officers, and so I didn't think that I was ever at any risk of falling below the standard. I kind of didn't think it was a real issue, but I did recognise it as being curious, and especially in light of the fact that the staff at the children's care home may also have received a similar encouragement to avoid, pushing this issue too far.
So what happened after you left the police?
Well, a lot of my colleagues went back on in civilian roles. I'd done my time as a police officer. I'd spent 30 years at it, and I wanted the break. In fact, to be honest with you, I spent the first few months just watching daytime telly, but that didn't end well. It's you can't do that when you're 48 and a half. And so I was really privileged to have had a great service, and I looked for a way of getting back into a role that was going to give some meaning. So I was tempted out of retirement, if you like, by some young individuals who were really keen to end the problem of modern slavery. Well, when they told me how big they thought it was, I thought, if it's that big, I've never seen it in the police, but it shouldn't be difficult to find. So we set up an intelligence gathering platform, and within a short space of time, we got information about our first victim of sexual slavery, and within 3 months, we'd managed to rescue her. So I guess that's where I was, then started out on a new career.
So after you made your first rescue, what did you start doing for the charity?
Well, we were still scoping out what the role was ahead of us. This massive problem of human trafficking, was it just a few sex workers? What was it? Did it affect children? And I was asked if that was the case. And I said, well, if it does, my experience would tell me that the best place to look would be in or around children's homes, where you've got the most vulnerable children drawn together as a kind of a honeypot. If there's a problem, that's where we'll find it.
And that's what you'd seen in Oldham. When you were operating there as a police officer, you saw so much evidence of children going missing, being taken away.
Well, we didn't really know the scope of the problem of modern slavery. Was it just a few women that had been trafficked into sex work on an ad hoc basis? Or was this something organised? Was it bigger? Did it affect children? And I was asked to look into this issue whilst we were at this early stage of the charity's development. And I said, well, look, if it does affect children, it's going to be most obvious in and around children's care homes. These are honeypots for people who would predate upon them. All these vulnerable children drawn together in a single location. That's where we'll find it, if it exists.
And of course, your own experience in Oldham showed that this was a big problem at the time. You had a great amount of evidence to show that this was going on.
Exactly. It was at a local level. That's what it appeared like to me. On a national level, was it the same elsewhere?
It was still a mystery at that point.
I suspected that maybe that's where we would find out the truth.
So after you established that you wanted to look at this problem, particularly around the Northwest, what strategy did you set about on?
Well, obviously, I felt that if I tried to look at, say, Netherhay Street or a place in Oldham, I'd find the same thing. But what I wanted to do was see whether this was a national problem. I got a map of the Northwest, and I closed my eyes and stuck a pin in, and it landed at an address in Bradford. Now, the idea was to see whether this was something that was replicated in different parts of the country, in different locations, or was it just my experience from Oldham? So we looked around that area and found a children's home very close to where the pin had landed, and I agreed with my colleagues that that's where we would set up an operation to see if there was a repeat of this problem.
So once you chose a location, you found a children's home that you wanted to look at, what was the next steps?
I went down to the location and identified a great property where we could observe the activities around that children's home, so we could identify the behaviours that were going on, whether there was a pattern, whether there were indications that this were pointing at certain types of behaviours going on. So we rented that property. I got hold of a security consultant who could assist me with this, and we contracted her in, and she was able to assist us as well. And we then ran a series of observations over several months, watching what was going on around that children's home.
And what did you see?
During the period of time that we were observing the children's home, we saw children hanging out of the windows, overlooking the street, looking down at cars driving towards the children's home, waving at cars that were flashing back at them, flashing the headlights back at them, The children would have phones in their hand and they'd clearly be talking to someone. I can only assume or conclude that that must have been the driver of the vehicle. And there was clearly a sophisticated communications network going on with people from outside. Those drivers, it's difficult for me to know who they were, but they were certainly, they would certainly fit the profile of the kinds of people who were exploiting children in Oldham. The local population was largely Pakistani, and I suspect that a large number of those people that were driving up, flashing their headlights, and that they were probably of that ethnic origin, although I never actually was able to ascertain that for a fact. These cars would park up close to the children's home, but not next to it, not obvious. They'd drive 2 streets past, pull in. The child would walk out the front as if they were just going for a walk. They'd then walk to that location, which was clearly a pre-arranged rendezvous point, and then they'd drive off together. And we wouldn't see them then until much later. That might be later that same night, but it wasn't always. Sometimes the police would be there, clearly taking a report that somebody had gone missing. We hadn't seen that person return, and I conclude that they were being reported missing. So, that was the kind of behaviour that we saw.
The children that are leaving the care home, were they often coming back the same evening?
Sometimes these girls would just be gone for a few hours, but quite often they didn't come back that night or even the next morning. And we'd see police cars parked up, at 1, 2 o'clock in the morning or whatever time, late at night, clearly taking reports of missing children, girls that we'd see go out at 5 and 6 and 7 o'clock the night before. So clearly there was a huge problem there. The other things that we witnessed was things like, people would park. There was one particular car I remember which parked up very close to the children's home. It was a different way of doing things. It's a different approach. And it would just be sat there for an hour and a half or 2 hours with clouds of smoke coming out of the windows. And I'm thinking, why would these 2 lads just be sat there smoking outside a children's home? But then when we went to look into it, they were smoking weed. And as we watched, we'd occasionally see young kids going over to the vehicle and start talking to these guys in the car. And whilst I never saw one of the children get in the car and go away with these individuals, it's clear to me that there was a process of grooming taking place there, where these individuals were flagging the fact that cannabis was available, and if the girls or the kids were interested, then they could build a relationship and rapport with them and then lure them away. And so I think that was a work in progress, a grooming work in progress, very close to the children's care home.
What other behaviours did you see over the 3 months of observation?
This gave us some idea of the types of behaviours that were typical at this children's home. And we decided we'd try and push them a little further to see where those girls were being taken when they were driven away from that rendezvous point just 2 streets down. And so we set up a mobile surveillance with some good people, but obviously very limited resources. So, the people, our security consultant and some of her colleagues helped us, but we weren't able to put together a really comprehensive surveillance team. So it was a bit hit and miss. We were, however, able to follow those children in vehicles to various different parts of Bradford. On a couple of occasions, they were taken to the town centre. On one occasion, we really strongly believe that one of those children was taken to a hotel in Bradford, but we didn't actually see them go in. So, I mean, we couldn't be 100% sure, but we're as certain as we can, given the surveillance that we operated, that was what was going on. On other occasions, the children were taken and lost in the vicinity of red light areas. And on one occasion, we followed a vehicle that had driven just about a mile down the road. We couldn't see the girl in the passenger seat of the vehicle. We thought, has she got out? I walked down on the opposite side of the road. There were no shops. There was nowhere to go. Yet the girl wasn't in the car. I walked straight past. He was just sat in the car waiting. waiting for her to come back from wherever she'd gone. I turned around, started walking back thinking, well, she's coming back, he's waiting for her. And as I'm walking back up, I saw a head pop up from the driver's side of the vehicle, a little head from his lap. Sorry, I felt really incensed because I'd missed something really obvious there. Excuse me, one. I'd missed it, and this to me showed me that we had a real problem here, and we needed to do something about it.
It became obvious to you then at this point that there was sexual abuse going on.
It was obvious to me what was going on. She certainly hadn't laid down in his lap for a little sleep because she was tired.
Did you think about trying to intervene at that point?
I'd gone past the vehicle. I was some way away. I didn't think she was still in it. When I turned back, I'm watching and I'm walking back up, a head pops up. My concern now is that they're driving off any second, and so I needed to get back to my vehicle as quickly as possible. I also felt that I'd missed the moment, and I didn't necessarily want to blow the fact that we were running a surveillance. So I wanted to try and get back and pull together what we could, find out where this vehicle was going to take her, what was going to happen. Anyway, as I say, we were a very small organisation and a very small team, and we did what we could.
Did you record the number plate of that vehicle?
At the time, I think we absolutely would have done, yes. But I don't know what, I don't obviously have those records now.
Do you remember how many vehicles like that you followed in that 3-month period when you started doing the mobile surveillance?
I think it's difficult to know exactly how many of the girls from the children's home were involved in this, but I'd say that there were at least 3 of them that were regularly involved, and possibly others as well. I don't know. Sometimes we saw, 2 girls go out together, but it's difficult to know if there were more. As I say, we were observing this for several months, but we weren't there every day and we weren't there all the time. So it's difficult to know exactly what was going on. And in terms of the numbers of vehicles, I'd say that there were probably, whilst we were watching, maybe 2-3 nights in a week, we'd see that happen 2 or 3 times, on each occasion.
So how many cars? So you saw, so maybe like 7 or 8 times a week it would happen?
Well, I mean, it's difficult to know because we just had a snapshot. But yeah, we saw it several times a week, 7, 5, 7, something like that times in a week. And to be honest, even though we did see the same car on more than one occasion, usually we didn't. There were a lot of different vehicles involved.
So after 3 months of gathering this information, what did you try and do with it to expand your work and prove to others what was going on?
We discovered after that period of observation that there was a real problem at Bradford. And we were really concerned about it. We were a church-funded organisation. We wanted to try and move this forward. And we contacted we had contacts in Bradford that led us to the bishop, who agreed to host a meeting for us to make a presentation to children's charities and other charities that were working with children in that area. And he also invited the local police, who had CSE teams that were working on the specific problems of child sexual exploitation in the Bradford area. We had a meeting.
So what happened at that meeting?
There were at least a dozen people who attended the meeting, not counting me and my colleague. I gave a presentation about what we'd discovered, and there wasn't any immediate response. There was a kind of, the way I could best describe it was a stunned silence. And I don't know what they were expecting. I thought they were expecting me to tell them that, but clearly they weren't. After, I think, what I considered to be an embarrassing couple of, it felt like ages, but it was probably about 20, 30 seconds. The representative from one of the children's charities said, well, everybody knows this. And I said, I beg your pardon, what do you mean everybody knows this? He said, everybody knows this is what goes on in children's homes. It goes on across the country. And then one of the other national charity persons said, yeah, that's right. It goes on all over the country. And I said, well, what do you mean it goes on all over the country? How can this be going on all over the country and we're not doing anything about it? I said, well, we're all working to stop it. I said, but what national coordination is there? Who's defined the problem? Why is it that I, after 30 years in the police, didn't realise this was a problem that was occurring in every children's home in the country? We've done reports on it. We've done a report on it which identified the issues concerned. And I said, but where is it? Who have you sent it to? It's in our offices. And I know that other charities have done reports as well. I said, but who's coordinating all this, bringing all this information together, defining exactly what the threats are to these children?
Did you get quite irate in the meeting?
Perhaps a little, yeah. Perhaps a little.
Was there a sense of frustration for you that you'd seen all this for yourself and they seemed to just not want to act on it?
I was astonished. I was absolutely astonished. I couldn't believe it. And I suspect that... I suspect I probably wound them up.
So what other reaction did you get from people in the meeting?
Just after that, one of the people from the charities told me that I needed to report this immediately to the social services and that was information that they needed to have immediately. There was no point in any further discussion as far as she was concerned. The meeting then fizzled out to coffee and cakes. A number of the officers, the CSE officers, came over and they were really quite excited about what it was that we'd achieved and done. They were saying that they felt that that's what was needed. They needed a surveillance capability because the one officer had 30 children on his caseload about which he was concerned they were being exploited in this way. And there was no way of gathering evidence and no way of capturing offenders. And he said that he was just one of many officers on that division that were engaged in this way, unable to do their jobs properly because they weren't properly resourced with the right tools. So as we were having this conversation, and I was thinking, well, there's some traction here. The inspector who was responsible for that team came over, gave me his card, and then started to talk to me about how he would be happy to receive a call from me and have a further conversation at some point in the future. And it was clear to me that I'd been shut down. The meeting was ended. It was over. We were not going to get anything more out of it.
So after you left that meeting, what did you do next?
The next day, I attended a meeting with this senior member of the social services. I was taken into a meeting room where she was, and sat next to her was a uniformed chief inspector. And so I was a little surprised by that, and it wasn't what I'd expected. And then I asked her, did she have any specific questions? And she said, I understand you've been following our children. I said, I've not been following your children. I've been following the people that I believe have been exploiting, taking advantage of your children. It's a very big difference. And she said, I don't see that there's a very big difference. I think you're a significant threat to our children. And I was a bit shocked by this. I was actually, and actually a little angered by it. And I said, well, I hate to disagree with you on this, but you're completely wrong. I'm not a threat to your children. These people that are following, that are taking them away are. She said, well, I think you are. And if you continue to follow our children, I'm going to have you arrested. I just couldn't believe what was going on. I couldn't believe that I was being told by this person who's supposed to be looking after the children, the children's interests, that she was going to arrest me for pointing out that they were vulnerable and being exploited. And I think I kind of lost my professional composure, and I said to her, I think this meeting's over. I'm not going to do what you say. I'm not going to take any advice from you when it's as ridiculous as it is. And I suggest you've got a uniformed chief inspector of police here. You should have him arrest me now if that's what you want to do.
And what happened?
And I walked out. The uniformed chief inspector didn't move, didn't say a word. And I just walked out of the meeting and drove back to Manchester. I was about 10 minutes down the road from this meeting and my phone rang, and it was a voice I recognised instantly. I immediately knew who it was. This is someone I've worked with before. Wasn't quite sure the name immediately, but he introduced himself to me and told me that he was, now a senior police officer at Bradford. And I thought, thank God for that. A voice of reason, someone, who I can have a relationship with already, who we can make some sense of this ridiculous situation. So I said, and I think I said something like that to him on the phone. And he said, John, what are you doing? I said, what do you mean? He says, don't you realise how much work our officers have put into stabilising this community? And what you're doing is likely to create a massive right-wing backlash that will burn parts of our town. He says, don't you see what you're doing? I mean, I didn't really, because, even though I thought maybe some of these individuals might be Pakistani, and in hindsight, I can see what that is now, it never occurred to me that this was an issue of race. It was an issue of child abuse.
Did you feel as though the person on the phone wanted to prioritise community cohesion over securing justice for those girls?
I think he had multiple concerns, and certainly one of them was the massive problem that he faced straightening out the racial conflicts that were likely to occur as a result of the information that I was bringing to him. And in some respects, I feel sorry for him, the predicament that he was in. But actually, I couldn't get over the fact that this was about the children. And it shouldn't really matter. We should do the right thing.
So did you feel as though he was diminishing justice for the girls over community cohesion?
He said to me, John, can't you just leave us alone? And at that point, I thought, well, maybe he's got a plan. Maybe he's got an amazing plan, and he's not going to let all these people down. And it's me that I don't see what's going on properly. And I guess I reassured myself that, no one, particularly not someone who I respected like that, could turn their back on these vulnerable children willfully. I just couldn't accept that the Children's Social Services could do that, or that the charities could do that. I didn't accept that that was possible. And so I thought, maybe I've just got this wrong. I'm new to this game. But I think that in hindsight, and it's probably been a source of much regret for me, I think that I was wrong in that thought, and that actually people have prioritised racial cohesion and racial stability over the exploitation of children. And I think probably to my eternal regret, I think that, in some way I fell into that same trap that day and walked away from that thinking, well, there's nothing more we can do. We've tried to tell everybody, and, better people than me are on this, so maybe we should just go away.
And what reaction did you get in the charity when you fed back these meetings?
Well, I think the honest truth is that none of us could understand what had I done. I've upset everybody. It's one of those, a million flies can't be wrong. Surely this isn't the establishment, everybody, everywhere you look, being wrong. This is you. You must be wrong, John. We looked at it, and we were a tiny team. We had lots to do with modern slavery in and around the UK sex industry. We kept ourselves very busy. We couldn't deal with everything. We tried to reach out into an area that was clearly a problem, and we didn't find any willing partners. We couldn't do it on our own.
You weren't ready for a battle with the establishment on this?
We've lost it already. We'd lost the battle already. You know, the social services, the police, the children's charities, gosh, even the church. You know, there wasn't the support there for tearing this down.
Obviously, the problem hasn't gone away since 2008. There have been many more investigations. We have more information about how bad this problem is nationally. Over 50 different towns and cities affected by grooming abuse gangs. Do you think that your efforts to expose and get justice for the girls who are victims of this trafficking operation, that was all tarnished by a fear about community cohesion? Do you think the mentality that shut down that operation in 2008 is still rife in politics and policing today?
Well, one thing I know for certain is that justice for girls is still a problem, and community cohesion is still a problem. And these are two massive, massive problems. And it would appear that on this issue, they clash. And so there's invariably going to be fallout. Now, whether that's at a political level or whether it's at a local level, a decision that maybe just denies one girl a little bit of justice because someone was being overly careful, it's just an unacceptable thought in my mind. And we need to defeat that kind of mentality.
So since all of this work, decades ago, looking into this issue, what efforts are you taking now to deal with group-based CSE?
It's something that never left me, to be honest. And the focus was on adult trafficking in its various forms, but this never really left me. And as a result, through our charity, we created a series of educational resources for schools to try and help young people identify the risks around grooming, sexual exploitation. And those materials are free. We don't charge for them. We want schools to take them. So please look at them if you're a school, or refer them to your school, and let's try and get these kids educated around the risks. The other thing that we tried, and to my regret, we never managed to get this one past the pilot stage, but I think it's something that's really important. These young people in care, right, they're mentored by their peers. They're mentored by their abusers, right? And they're sometimes looked after by their carers who, to be honest, if the children are out on the streets, the care home's quiet and easy. And if they're in and kicking off, it's difficult and it's hard. And I have great sympathy for everyone involved in looking after these young people. We brought together a team of exceptional mentors, brilliant people, academia, from business, and even sometimes just brilliant mothers who would get alongside these young kids and show them what it was like to be part of a loving family who would care for them, who would take an interest in them, one-on-one mentorship. And actually, it worked really well for those vulnerable groups. They were one of them even went into voluntary work as a result. And so, I think there is hope for these young people, but we all need to do more to turn it round.